Good morning, Metalheads Unit. Welcome to a new episode of the Metal Meltdown, and today we're looking at the latest album from Arma entitled Sulphur English. If you've been paying any attention to heavy metal music recently, then there's a good chance you probably have heard of Arma at some point. This album, Sulphur English, is for many people their most anticipated album of the year, critically acclaimed across the board so far. A lot of reviews have been overwhelmingly positive, not just formal reviews, but as well as a lot of comments that I've seen throughout the internet, including people that follow the Metal Meltdown and that I follow as well. And even last weekend when I was in Philadelphia, people were raving about seeing Arma not that long ago at the Decibel Beer Metal pre-festival show, or whatever the fuck it was called, and raving about how incredible this album was, which is a big deal considering their previous record, Paradise Gallows, was also critically acclaimed when it came out. If I'm not mistaken, it even made Rolling Stone's Best Albums of the Year list, or at the very least it made their Best Metal Albums list. I can't remember. I remember it also scored them a massive tour with Carcass and Death Heaven later that same year, which I still regret not going to. I regret not going to that fucking show. I would have had to have driven to fucking Kitchener, but it would have been fucking worth it. I so regret not going to that show. With all that in mind, it's also fair for me to assume that you've heard that this record is also very stylistically different from Paradise Gallows. It's not quite as proggy, at least not in the obvious sense. It's not quite as colorful and melodic as that record was at times. Instead, it's a lot more dense. It's a lot more doom-oriented. It's heavier sonically, aesthetically and tonally, digging deeper into the post-metal psych while retaining the incredibly heavy doom soundscape that has typically been painted across all of their records, but painted significantly harder here as a result. And with all of that in mind, I'm just going to say it right off the bat, not really loving this record the way everyone else is. Which isn't to say I think it's bad. I think it's very well articulated and composed. Everything that Arma does on this record is 100% intentional. And it's not like anyone fucks up here. It's not like there's anything that's ill-advised or out of place. Like, everything about this album makes sense aesthetically and musically. In the grand scheme of things, it's a generally well-constructed record. But it's just not doing the trick for me. And I wasn't really entirely sure why. I've listened to this record quite a few times. The first listen of which I was pretty uneventful for me. It just did not grab me at all in any fucking way whatsoever, to the point where I was almost willing to write off the album completely. And it was only on further listens that the album finally began to open up to me a little bit. But again, not enough for me to fully see what everyone's talking about here. I think my problem is that generally I do miss the more colorful and melodic aspects of Paradise Gallows. I really do. I mean, their music is insanely heavy. And all their records have been consistently heavy, but the color and the melody, the life, the energy gave Paradise Gallows a really great contrast that made it such a great record. I mean, it's a record that has grown on me immensely since I listened to it originally, and that record, I loved it even so at the time. Now I love it even more. That lovely contrast is missing here. The album is noticeably harsher, it's more brooding, it's more haunting, which in some ways is a genuinely good thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with genuinely heavy metal. But the problem is, for me, is as a result, it also kind of meanders. It also kind of lumbers around. The band kind of repeat themselves. It's done intentionally so to achieve this almost sun-type effect with maybe more flourishes, but nonetheless. Like, honestly, playing the two tracks of Wax and Sea and Citadel side by side, I don't really see much of a difference. If you showed these songs to someone who is brand new to Arma, I really doubt they'd be able to differentiate the two. During both of these songs, even on repeat listens, I kind of just sat there and went, man, it would be great if they got to the point already. These songs, in my opinion, just kind of waste time meandering with the same riffs and the same patterns. And Citadel falls even more for it because it's got less drums and just inherently has less going on, inherently has less happening to reel you in. I do like some of the acoustic pieces on the record. In fact, I really like how they're interwoven into the sound. This is where I think the contrast that I loved about Paradise Gallows begins to reemerge, but in a brand new way. Because these acoustic pieces found in songs like Stillness and The Atavist Meridian feel genuinely super haunting and authentic. It weirdly kind of feels like an odd fusion of like Godflesh and some of the more acoustic Catatonia stuff, and I dig the crap out of it. And I generally like aesthetically what's happening on this record. For instance, Howling Lands. This song sounds like absolute fire. I mean that literally. This sounds like somebody going through absolute pure anguish. I don't think I've ever really heard anguish translated this well to music, if we're being honest. Which makes this record such a weird puzzle for me, because it is so well produced, so well composed, so well articulated. Inter Arma have clearly done everything they set out to do. It's just not particularly entertaining for me a lot of the time. I'd like to just chalk this down to personal taste, but I don't necessarily believe that, because I've enjoyed Inter Arma's other work, and I've enjoyed other albums of this style. But I might have to do that. I might have to chalk it down to personal taste. I might have to be a little generous and acknowledge that it is an incredibly well executed and composed and articulated record. It's just simply not for me. And I know that that's a shitty excuse, but I really don't know what else to say. So I'm going to go with a 3.5 out of 5. This is a record I probably would have given a 3, but again, I really want to acknowledge just how well composed and put together this damn thing is. Like, sure, the record limps around and it's generally pretty repetitive across the board, even in its most inspired moments, but that's also kind of the point. It's kind of meant to be repetitive. It's supposed to be. It's supposed to be that way so it can hammer everything into you, so it can make this as uncompromising and extreme and powerful as possible. Like, this album is not meant to be a walk in the park. It's meant to be, you are walking in the park, and then someone comes by and slices your fucking feet open, and suddenly you're crawling through the park. It goes without saying then that this album will require your patience and an open mind. A lot of people have been willing to give it that, and good for them, and good for Inter Arma. However, if you have not already given the album that time, that benefit of the doubt, I suggest you give it at least one shot and you really open your mind, and at the very least to understand what the band is trying to do and why it doesn't stick with you. I do hope that this album grows on me the way Paradise Gallows did, but generally speaking, I do miss the melody, I do miss the color, I miss how much more dynamic that record was. I like how the band have dipped their toes completely into the world of just sad, fucked up, depressing music. But I guess I just have to chalk it up to, it's not for me. So yeah, 3.5 out of 5. I'm a little disappointed that I didn't like this as much as I wanted to, and even more disappointed that I have to give it a 3.5 out of 5, almost out of sheer generosity. But nonetheless, I do encourage you to look at this album, because this is an album I think people are going to be debating and talking about for a long, long, long time. And again, it's entirely possible that I and a couple others are simply in the minority. I mean, who fucking knows? Maybe even I will be turned by the end of the year. Maybe this will somehow end up on my top 10 at the end of the year. Who knows? But for now, an incredibly generous, perhaps maybe too generous 3.5 out of 5. And that is it for the Metal Meltdown. I'm not an expert, nor do I claim to be. So what do you think? Do you like this record? Do you not like this record? And what do you want to hear from me next? Thank you for watching. Make sure you press subscribe so you get updates on the Metal Meltdown fucking immediately. And you have yourself a fantastic fucking day.